On January 6, 2013, an independent filmmaker named Laura Poitras got a cryptic email from a person going by the nickname Citizen4, which stated that he had obtained classified documents from the US intelligence community and would be willing to share them if Laura Poitras took some precautions to make sure he was not discovered. These documents later turned out to be the biggest leak in American intelligence history, and the person going by the nickname Citizen4 was later revealed to be a man named Edward Snowden. From his background to the consequences of his leaks, this is the story of the biggest leaker in history. On the 21st of July, 1983, a baby by the name of Edward Joseph Snowden was born in the small city of Elizabeth City in North Carolina. His childhood was a pretty normal one, and not much is of importance to this story. There are, however, two things that are worth mentioning. One, he was a computer genius from a very young age, and two, at the age of 15, he got a cold that kept him out of high school for 4 months. And due to various reasons, one of which being the deterioration of Snowden's parents' marriage, he never came back. This left him feeling lost, which, coupled with his family's deep military ties, was probably the reason that when the US invaded Iraq and called for new military recruits, he answered. Snowden joined the US Army on the 28th of September 2004, and he showed signs of being a great soldier, following orders obediently. Sadly, however, during a standard drill, he broke his fibula bone, and even after healing, the bone was so weak that he could never do military service ever again. But because he still wanted to serve his country, and because of his strong interest in computers, he, in 2006, decided to join the CIA. Snowden had a strong interest in all things related to computers and cryptography from a very young age, and in his new job it showed. One of the first things Snowden was supposed to do was to put up a covert communications network. This exercise was supposed to take 5 to 8 hours, but it only took Snowden 38 minutes. While his classmates and most other trainees were sent to the Middle East, Snowden was not. The CIA had bigger plans for him. For a few years, Snowden bounced around from job to job all over the world. During these jobs, he repeatedly saw the misuse of the CIA's and the NSA's resources. One of the biggest misuses that Snowden witnessed was during a job in Geneva, Switzerland. During this job, he got to know that people within the CIA used a system called XKEYSCORE for their own selfish gain. XKEYSCORE was a program that could find anything on the internet. Unlike a regular search engine that can only find public information, XKEYSCORE could find everything. Snowden also witnessed the exploitation of these systems on a bigger scale. During one of these jobs in Japan, Snowden overheard some high-ranking officials in the NSA trying to persuade the Japanese military to let them get access to their country's internet. The Japanese were understandably not so happy about this, but it did not matter all that much, because the NSA had already infiltrated the country's internet. They had installed malware in everything from dams to trains, so that if Japan ever became the US's enemy, it would be lights out. And as Snowden later found out, Japan was far from the only country where the US had done these types of things to ensure their global dominance. After finding out that one of the softwares he had developed as a simple backup system was used to find the location of SIM cards with suspicious activity and then send drone strikes to bomb the entire building where the SIM card was located, Snowden was finally fed up with all the misuse and the lying that was going on in the CIA and NSA, and decided that the full extent of the surveillance done by the NSA and CIA should not be classified information withheld from the public and Congress. In the Mir Hotel in Hong Kong, Laura and a journalist friend of hers, Glenn Greenwald, was sitting beside a giant alligator. They saw a man approaching them while playing with a Rubik's Cube in his right hand. "When does the restaurant open?" Glenn Greenwald asked the approaching man. "Noon, but the food is a little too spicy," he responded. That was the predetermined answer that Snowden had arranged with the two. They promptly took the elevator to the floor of Snowden's room, After entering the room and saying hi, they began their work. Over the course of 10 days, Snowden revealed the full extent of the NSA's and CIA spying on the public. These leaks revealed so much that this video won't do them justice, but if you're interested, I would suggest reading the articles about them. One of the things leaked, however, was something I have already brought up, that being XKEYSCORE. Another thing that the leaks revealed the full extent of was something called the FISA courts. FISA stands for Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, and is the law introduced in 1978 to regulate US intelligence. FISA courts are pretty unique in the fact that they are held behind closed doors. It was the FISA courts that had approved the programs that the NSA and the CIA were now using to spy on the public. Another thing the leaks revealed was SSO, which stands for Special Source Operations. This was a program that collected all the information going through the internet for future use. It was commissioned in the name of combating terrorism and was supposed to be used to look up terrorists, but what it ultimately led to was surveillance on an unimaginable scale. During these days, when the interviews were being published, the world and the US government were collectively freaking out. People were shocked to find out the full extent of the US's counter-terrorism, and the US government were freaking out about the fact that all their secrets were being spilled and they had no idea who was doing it. Until one of the last days at the hotel, Snowden remained anonymous. After having given all his files and documents to Laura and Glenn, Snowden boarded a plane leaving for Russia. His plan was to get to Ecuador, where he had been offered asylum. Since there was no direct flight from Hong Kong to Ecuador that did not intrude on US airspace, he had to take the long way around, which meant landing in a bunch of countries, the first of which being Russia. Upon arriving in Russia, he was informed that his passport had been revoked by the Secretary of State, John Kerry. He then stayed in that airport for 6 weeks, without any ability to leave, but after some back and forth, he finally got 1-year temporary residence in Russia. Snowden himself has stayed there until this day, but the consequences of his leaks have not. Upon hearing about the extent of the CIA and NSA spying, both the general public and governments around the world were understandably shocked. And almost immediately, the world was kicked into action. In 2015, the USA Freedom Act was passed, which ended the NSA's ability to passively collect massive amounts of data on all the world's inhabitants. In 2018, one of the strongest protection laws in the world took effect in the EU, called the General Data Protection Regulation, or for short, GDPR. This law was probably set in motion by the Snowden leaks, other leaks, and other similar laws that were introduced around the world. Protection against terrorism was no longer an adequate excuse for the intrusion of privacy on a massive scale. The post-9/11 growth of mass surveillance seemed to slow, if just for a little bit. While going through all the articles and interviews in my research for this video, it was first of all very hard to find any information from people who disagreed with Snowden. This was probably because the NSA is pretty quiet for obvious reasons, which has the unfortunate effect of all the events almost exclusively being able to be heard from Snowden's perspective. I don't think that Snowden was or is lying about the information he leaked or his intentions. I think he's telling the truth, but it is his truth. Something that makes this even more difficult is that almost all the people who disagree with Snowden and think that what he did was harmful and reckless focus too much on his character. This is exactly what Snowden feared, something which he mentioned in one of the interviews he did in Hong Kong, where he said this.
I feel the modern media has a big focus on personalities.
Totally.
And I'm a little concerned the more we focus on that, the more they're going to use that as a distraction. And I don't necessarily want that to happen, which is why I've consistently said, I'm not the story here.
When going through all the research, I was also surprised, not when learning about how much we are constantly being spied on from every direction and having our data sold without our knowledge, but rather at how little people care. You may have noticed that the consequences chapter was pretty short, and that had to do with the fact that it was so very hard to find meaningful consequences from this whole debacle. It's now been 10 years since Snowden leaked this information, and what has really happened? a few lackluster laws. It's a shame that Snowden risked his life in this way for everyone who heard it to then not care and just move on with their lives. I myself will think a lot more about protecting my privacy after having learned of the full extent of the privacy violations that happen constantly, and I would recommend you do too. It may seem hard, but it's not. I would suggest you start by using a VPN and to try to stay anonymous, and that you do as much as possible to avoid big tech companies and get them out of your life, so that they can't steal your data and sell it to governments around the world. If you do not do this and go on with your life as before, letting companies use your data as they wish, then know this. Every border you cross, every purchase you make, every call you dial, every cell phone tower you pass, friend you keep, article you write, site you visit, subject line you type, and packet you route is in the hands of a system whose reach is unlimited, but whose safeguards are not.